So Rachel Reeves has broken housing laws and could, and arguably should, be liable for prosecution with the possibility of an unlimited fine. Instead of a prosecution, however, the council might opt to impose a civil penalty of not more than £30,000 or seize control of her property. So what do we think is really going to happen? Now, I'm going to be somewhat cynical and say probably nothing. And so far, that appears to be the response from Keir Starmer, in that it does not warrant any further investigation. But I'll come on to that in this video. Now, many of you that watch my videos hopefully like to understand the law. I'll point out the law for you, where this comes from, and why I don't believe, personally, that this is just a simple mistake. She says it is, but I'll tell you why I think it's not in this video. So please do subscribe, and I'll be very grateful. So let me take you to the law first of all. This comes from the Housing Act of 2004, whereupon it is an offence to let out a property if there is a licence requirement and you let it out without having such a licence. I'll come back to the licence in a moment, what that really means, why they need one, and why she says she didn't know about it, which I don't believe, but we'll come back to that in a minute. This is an offence under section 95 sub 1. A person commits an offence if having control of or managing a house which is required to be licensed but is not so licensed. Now, there were some changes to this. The cap was removed. Subsection 5 provides that it is an offence to let a property out without such a licence on summary conviction to a fine. The F1 and the bit in brackets just means that that's been substituted, it's been changed. This is now an unlimited fine. In the alternative, there is another possibility under the Housing Act, section 294A, where the local authority can instead impose a financial penalty to be determined by the local housing authority, not more than £30,000. So in short, she needed a licence to let out her property. She didn't have a licence. She's therefore broken the law. She has thus written a letter of apology, which I'll come to here. Dear Keir, it says, I wanted to make you aware of a matter which has been brought to my attention regarding my family home, which we are letting out to tenants via an external letting agency. Both of those things are important. I'll come back to that in a minute. She says the property is situated in Dulwich Wood, ward of Southwark Council. There are selective licensing requirements, which I'll come back to in a minute, in this ward for renting out a property. Regrettably, we were not aware that a license was necessary, and so we did not obtain the license before letting the property out. Many of you might have picked up on what I'm going to pick at in just a moment. She says, this was an inadvertent mistake. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we took immediate action and have applied for the license. The property is declared on the members' register with interests, and I've spoken today with the independent advisor on ministerial standards, and I've made the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards aware. I sincerely apologise for this error, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Keir Starmer's fired back and says, thank you for your letter and meeting with me this evening. The public rightly expects the highest standards of conduct from the politicians who serve them. Bearing in mind he's previously said that, those who make the law cannot break the law. And Keir Starmer said if he got so much as a fixed penalty that he would do the right thing and resign.
But if the police decide to issue me with a fixed penalty notice, I would, of course, do the right thing and step down. This matters. It matters because the British public deserve politicians who think the rules apply to them. They deserve politicians who hold themselves to the highest standards. And they deserve politicians who put the country first rather than themselves.
But firstly, his letter here, he says, I have this evening, he says, the Ministerial Code sets out these values and I've made it a core tenet of this government's mission to uphold them. He said, I have this evening consulted with my independent advisor on ministerial standards. He has advised me that in relation to your inadvertent failure to secure an appropriate licence for your rental property and in light of your prompt action to rectify the position, including your apology, Further investigation's not necessary. Many of you might now be wondering, well, what if that was you? Would you be prosecuted, or would a "I'm sorry, I didn't know" suffice? I suspect many of you might be cynical and think that the apology won't suffice, but by the by, let's read on. He says further investigation is not necessary. He says the Ministerial Code makes clear that in certain circumstances an apology is a sufficient resolution, bearing in mind that there's an unlimited fine and the council could, in the alternative, either seize control of the property or impose a penalty of up to £30,000. But in this case, a mere "I'm sorry" would seem to suffice for Keir Starmer. Reading on. It is important that all ministers are able to acknowledge where they consider themselves to have fallen below the standards expected of them. I'm satisfied that this matter can be drawn to a close following your apology, so just apologise for it and it's fine, I suppose. Would that work for everybody? I suspect not. Would everyone else be expected to comply with the law? I suspect they would. Would they be prosecuted and fined for it? I suspect they would. But this is the Chancellor, so that alone is one reason I don't quite believe it. But I'll come back to the more robust reason I don't believe that in a minute. He says that he's satisfied that this can be drawn to a close. He said it's regrettable that the appropriate licence was not sought sooner, and it's right that you've taken the appropriate steps today to address it. It's clear to me that you're treating this matter with the urgency and seriousness it deserves. Now, a lot of people might think that, well, they've dealt with things urgently and seriously, and yet they still get prosecuted and perhaps fined for it. So let's come to a couple of things here. First of all, let's look at the Southwark Council website. Because how would anyone know, you might ask, if you need such a license? Well, first you check. I mean, if you're going to do anything, you check, am I allowed to do this? If you're going to, erect a garage on your premises, you think, do I need permission to do this thing? If you're going to build a wall, you think, do I need permission to do this? If you're going to knock down a wall, you think, do I need permission to do this? If you're going to install something, go somewhere, whatever it is you're going to do, you might think, do I need permission to do this? Now, as Chancellor letting out a property, you might think, well, let's just check that I'm doing everything right. So for that, you might come to the Southwark Council website, which makes clear, strangely enough, whether you need a license for these things. Now, it's got various sections on here for private tenants, landlords, Gold Standard Charter, private rented property licensing. And property licensing rules, how to apply, report an unlicensed property, claim rent back, etc. Now, there's guidance for landlords. We can go into here. Guidance for landlords generally, letting the property through them, property licensing. At this point, you might think, maybe I need a license because I'm letting out the property, going to become a landlord. Maybe I need a license. So if you click through to licensing here, so this is absolutely no criticism of Southwark Council whatsoever. Go to licensing. It says, here's an overview. There's 3 property types of licensing schemes that cover different types of privately rented properties. They usually last for 5 years. Properties with evidence of poor management and other housing-related problems might be given a 1 or 3 year license, depending on the issue. Now, there are mandatory licensing requirements. Many of you will be familiar with those. Those are houses of multiple occupancy. That is where 3 or more people in 2 or more households, i.e. 2 families, and there are 3 or more people, that becomes an HMO, a house of multiple occupancy or occupation. Then you need a license. So a large HMO is if both these things apply, you've got at least 5 tenants that live there, more than one household, they share a toilet, bathroom or kitchen or whatever. So for either of those, they are mandatory licensing requirements. Then there are additional licensing requirements. These include HMOs to let a maximum of 4 people with shared bathrooms and various other things. Not relevant here. The next one is selective licensing. That is what is at play with Rachel Reeves here. Selective licensing is needed by all other privately rented properties in our selective licensing delegations, not covered by mandatory or additional licensing. Selective licensing designation Southwark wards include the following, and one of which is Dulwich Wood. So that took me less than 2 minutes, I think, to explain it to you and to find that there's a requirement, a selective licensing requirement for Dulwich Wood. Jumping back to Rachel Reeves' letter here for a moment, she said that the property is situated in Dulwich Wood, ward of Southwark Council. Selective licensing requirements apply there, but she didn't get one. Now, the reason that I have just a little bit of difficulty in believing that this was just a simple mistake, I'm not saying that it wasn't just a simple mistake, it's just difficult to believe that it was a simple mistake, is, for example, if we look at this random estate agent here, Foxtons, no association, no sponsorship whatsoever, it's listing properties in the Dulwich area here under Southwark Council. And if we go as though we are a new landlord looking to rent out our property, I'm not saying she used Foxtons, don't know who she used, but it doesn't matter. If you went to any estate agent like this, you would expect that they know what they're doing. And when you look at landlords here, get a valuation, why use Foxtons, property management, renters' rights, rent protection, help for landlords, legal and compliance. If you look at help for landlords, again, it tells you to look at yield calculators, landlord advice, landlord's guide. And if you look at some of those, let's look at the advice section. Straight away, it says landlord basics and legal requirements, licensing and HMOs. You would think that you'd look at these. If you look at the guide, again, it says expert letting made simple, book the valuation, choose the agent, etc., etc., and all of which you would look at the legal requirements. Now, coming back to, for example, the landlord basics here, or even back to the homepage, you might look at legal and compliance, legal requirements. Let's look at the legal requirements. The first thing that hits you is licensing, property licensing. And so you would look at this and you would think that this agent or any of the agents would know that there's a license required in those areas. Now, it just seems a little bit strange to me in that whenever you do anything, you would look to see whether or not you need permissions to do it, or particularly if you're working in government and you've got an important position like you're the Chancellor, you would want to know that things are done properly. And it's not as though Rachel Reeves can say that she didn't know what selective licensing is, because as they say, there's always a tweet, and this one is not an old one. This was from 10 days ago. This, as I understand it, is her campaign account where she posted as follows. I welcome Leeds City Council's decision to expand their selective landlords licensing policy to include the Armley area. While many private landlords operate in the right way, we know that lots of private tenants in Armley face problems with poorly maintained housing. This scheme means private landlords in the area will be required by law to obtain a licence for any residential property they are seeking to let, and must meet certain standards to ensure the property is safe and in a decent state of repair. She goes on, everyone deserves a safe and secure home. I look forward to continuing to work with the local community to improve conditions for renters. Now, this obviously means that she knows that selective licensing exists. She knows what it's for. She knows that there are requirements to maintain standards, meet certain standards and criteria, and that it is a legal requirement. They are required by law to obtain a license. So if that is in the forefront of your mind, having posted this 10 days ago and championing it as a good thing, you would think that you would rent out your own property with the required license. And if, as she said, this was done through an external lettings agency, one might then ask the question, well, why did they not raise it? Or did they raise it? And why, through all of that, did you end up not having a license? But none of that really matters, really, because the fact is, it's not necessarily the agent's fault, per se, because it falls down to the person letting the property. If you have ultimate control of the property and you're managing the property and you let it out without the license, then you are liable to prosecution or a civil penalty. Now, reportedly, she let this property out for £3,200 a month. And technically, the council could also order her, if the tenant were to apply, for 12 months rent under a rent repayment order, which calculates at £38,400. So that council says that it employs resources to find unlicensed properties, and also stressed that it may apply an enhanced application fee to cover the additional costs incurred in having to find the unlicensed property. So what will happen? I suspect nothing. Keir Starmer thus far has said that it doesn't warrant any investigation. But I think many of you might feel that this is unfair, and I think many landlords will certainly feel that it's unfair if absolutely nothing happens, when they would fully expect to be prosecuted even for a simple mistake and be levied with some kind of fine. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section below. I personally find this very difficult to believe that it was just a simple mistake. I'm not saying that it wasn't just a simple mistake. I'm saying it's difficult to believe it. But let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching.